Star Wars The Clone Wars is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year, the series that inspired me as a kid and my entire YouTube channel back in 2008. Now here we are, a full decade later, with nothing but amazing memories and excitement for the future with what will likely be the final season on Disney's streaming service in 2019. But Anakin Skywalker, Obi Wan Kenobi, and Ahsoka Tano may very well be my favorite characters of all time. And I've been working on and off to finally make proper versions of them in Lego, because when I was 10, we were all using Sharpies and mostly crappy decals to make our custom clones, and none of us ever really considered customizing the main 3 Jedi of the entire series. So it's definitely weird to say that after all these years, this is essentially my first time making them. But anyway, it has been so satisfying to finally do this, and I can't wait for you guys to see these and all of the new Clone Wars minifigures I'm hoping to make. But before we get started, I thought I'd let you guys know that a ton of new Clone Wars merch just hit the store over on mgfcustoms.com, and there's going to be a lot more to come with future showcases. And I'm also doing a new giveaway, so take your pick of anything from the lineup, subscribe, and click the bell so you don't miss the reply if you win. And with all of that, let's get started. So, Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One himself. This was, of course, like I said, very exciting for me to make, and the number one thing, of course, that I had to avoid when getting started with minifigures from the Clone Wars were obviously those animated style eyes that Lego carried on with all the way, I think it was like until 2014, when Rebels began. That's when they finally dropped the animated style eyes for animated characters and just stuck with the universal black dot with the white pupil in the center. So of course that gave us a chance to look back and finally realize that a lot of the minifigures Lego made for the Clone Wars definitely had questionable face designs. So what I did was I actually used a Hayden Christensen head from the Attack of the Clones 2013 Republic gunship, and I painted the scar over the right eye, and then I did the exact same thing for the aggressive facial expression. But before I show you the aggressive facial expression, I do just kind of want to mention how it's almost kind of strange how the primary facial expression here almost lends itself more to Matt Lanter's animated style Anakin than it does Hayden Christensen, but it still works both ways, honestly. But if we can turn the head around to give you a better look at the aggressive facial expression, like I said, I did paint the scar on this side of the head as well. I think that this is probably more so the Hayden Christensen side of the head, so it's almost kind of weird. It's like you get both versions of Anakin in one. Does any of that make sense? Probably not. Totally fine. But the lightsaber, just to get it out of the way really quick, this is actually my buddy Aaron, Legomatic 9's design. I've used this before for my Rey from The Last Jedi. It's definitely a really interesting process making this lightsaber with a bit of sculpting and actually using a piece of a soda can, but it really does get the job done, and it's a hell of a lot better than the standard lightsaber that Lego offers. So yeah, that was pretty tedious, and actually the last element that I made for the minifigure, and I waited quite a while to do so, and was using rays for like all of the photos that I was taking of Anakin. Anyway, you can see that a big part of this minifigure were obviously the robes, all the custom modded and trimmed and painted Cape Madness accessories. It's almost weird to even call them Cape Madness accessories at this point, because I've basically just cut different pieces of fabric out of larger Cape Madness capes. So many capes, you probably are so confused, and that's totally understandable. But basically what I did was ordered some big capes from a bricklink seller who makes them, and just cut pieces of fabric out, glued them to the front of the torso, and then wrapped them over the top of the actual torso piece, and then over the back, and glued them to the back and the lower half of the back, and I pretty much then glued the 3D belt on top of that. Then I made the custom pouches, glued those onto the belt, painted all of this, and it worked out pretty well, I think. As you can see, I actually did my own dark brown color for the robes here, and then I actually hit them with a purple wash, which is something I really wanted to make sure I did on this minifigure, because if you look at Anakin's robes throughout the later half of the Clone Wars, there definitely was almost like a purplish tint running through them, and so I portrayed that here with this minifigure, and I think it worked out pretty well. But then, as you can see, the arms do also feature some 3D elements. You can see that I do have them fully painted as well, and definitely a pretty tedious design over here on the right gauntlet, especially down here over on the hand as well, because I did paint hand detail onto both of them, and you can see I had to paint every single one of those lines, which is definitely pretty fun, and that was not in focus, and you can kind of see it better right there. So that was definitely pretty tedious. But then you can see the hand detail over on the left hand here, and it's pretty great, man. But other than that, you can see the waist cape and the robes that extend onto it are actually not connected to the ones on the top. And what I mean by that is they're not continuous. They're completely separate. So I think that makes it pretty clear the robes are not connected in any way. And this is simply because as a customizer, it's just always kind of a thing with me. I like to preserve the feature of just disassembly. You know, I like to be able to pull my minifigure apart wherever possible and just kind of maintain those basic fundamentals of the Lego minifigure. And I think I definitely achieved it here and with Obi Wan, as you'll see in just a second here. But I did actually also use a pair of tiny tactical glove tops on the wrists, which I forgot to mention a second ago, and I think those complement the minifigure really well here. And if we go ahead and remove the waist cape, this is again a custom modified and painted Cape Madness waist cape with those additional bits of robes glued on and painted. You can see that folds out like so, and then the individual slots just wrap over the two pegs on the legs. But before I do so, I do want to give you a look at the legs, because of course I did paint them underneath the waist cape, not the actual belt, because that gets covered up by the waist cape, and you can see that design on the legs though does wrap around all four sides, and it's pretty tedious stuff, man. The painting those lines and getting them that symmetrical was pretty interesting. Designs like that are always fun. But now we get to the fun part where I'm going to stall as I go ahead and put the waist cape back on. We do slot number 1, and then, yeah, all of that is painted except for that face. But I painted the scar on both sides like I mentioned earlier. I don't really have anything else to add other than, hey, let's do some bragging. I've actually met both Anakins. I met Hayden Christensen last year, which was a bucket list moment. That was amazing. And Matt Lanter back in 2011. But I was a puffy, rosy-cheeked little kid, so it was really awkward, but it still happened. Anyway.
This is Obi Wan Kenobi, and you're watching MGF Customs and Reviews. The force is strong here.
Hello there.
Obi Wan Kenobi, the high ground himself. This figure was very similar to Anakin in terms of the process of making this character, because obviously the robes are very similar and almost laid out exactly the same way. Obviously the significant difference being the entire figure painted in a base color of tan with a dark tan wash running throughout all of that lighter tan to make it look a little bit more realistic. But let's talk about the head for a second first, because as you can see, the head using Lego's standard Obi-Wan head from the Attack of the Clones sets of 2013 and the Revenge of the Sith sets of 2014. However, of course, I did paint everything in my own brown color for the beard and the eyebrows, and even the eyes in black to keep everything looking a little bit more consistent. And then I also painted the hairpiece in that same brown color as well. But just get it out of the way, Obi-Wan's lightsaber. This is actually the second version of this lightsaber, because the first one kind of broke in half. And this is the one that those of you who follow me on social media, you would have seen in the first preview photo, and it looked really good, and it was pretty good, except the problem is, while it's a really cool design for my buddy Shane the Last Prime, I obviously don't use that great of a glue, and I knew that my glue really wasn't going to work in that scenario, because basically the problem was the part where the entire hilt was glued together is actually where the minifigure has to grip the handle, and I think it only took 2 or 3 times of inserting and removing this hilt from Obi-Wan's hand for it to finally break in half, but I knew it would, and I tried to order a better glue, but I'm pretty sure it got lost in the mail, so I just gave up and ordered this hilt from Brickforge, because Brickforge actually makes their own Obi-Wan hilt. However, I did sand the top of it, and then I painted the top half and the bottom half with my own silver, and I also add a little bit of detail on the top there as well, which you can see wrapping around the entirety of the circumference of where that blade goes in place, and then also you can see the switch painted in gold there, and the button here, and a little bit of gold on the top half of the handle as well. So I'm pretty proud of that. I think it looks just as good. Getting out of the way to talk about the rest of the minifigure here, one thing I didn't mention with Anakin is that there was an original layer of fabric glued onto the flat surface of the torso before these two primary pieces were glued to the middle and then extended up and over the top and then stopping on the back. And then right there, you'll already notice one of those differences, speaking of the back, in comparison to Anakin's, is that the robes do not actually extend down onto the back of the waist cape. And I was pretty surprised by that when I looked at my reference pictures, and it's not that they extend anyway, because just like Anakin, to keep the basic, functionality of the minifigure going, the pieces are completely separate. So in that way, just like Anakin, but not exactly the same in terms of the overall layout. And another thing I didn't mention with Anakin is that I did actually outline all of the individual pieces of fabric. For Anakin, it was dark gray. For Obi-Wan, you can see it's more of a dark tan, and you can see that running throughout pretty much all of the fabric accessories here. And then once all the fabric was glued and painted, of course, I did glue on the 3D belt, just like Anakin, except obviously Obi-Wan having 2 pouches here, his own like custom little belt piece piece in the center there with a unique shape. And then I did paint these pouches in my own mixed reddish brown color that I did also use on the boots, which we'll talk about in a second. And then the arms, you can kind of see that dark tan wash that I mentioned a little bit earlier, also extending onto them. But also the clone trooper gauntlets that Obi Wan sports had to be fully painted, and white paint is not fun to work with. It is thick and gloppy and unreliable, and that is why I am so glad and somewhat surprised that they wound up looking as clean as they do. And that same white clone trooper armor does extend down onto both hands, and you can see I do have that one little piece of armor painted onto each one of those hands there, and then on the right hand here as well with a pair of tiny tactical glove tops for Obi-Wan over his wrists as well, just like Anakin. And one thing that I was not able to feature on Anakin was the comp link, because with Anakin he had these stripes that pretty much took up a little bit too much space on his gauntlets and didn't allow for the comp link to be, glued on really at all, or else it would have looked really bizarre. And so I managed to fit it on with Obi-Wan though, with all the appropriate detail, and I'm really proud of that. And it's probably my favorite touch of the minifigure overall. And then also on the right gauntlet here, you can see I do have the Republic symbol painted on there as well. But just making the basic gauntlets themselves before I added any of that detail was pretty involved, because I did, while cutting out the basic shape of them to keep them 3D, and before gluing them on, I had to factor in the upper half of the elbow pad. So the upper half of the elbow pad was actually cut out, and then the lower half is just painted, so it kind of creates almost like an illusion. If any of that makes sense, probably not, that's okay. And then you can see the pouch glued onto the back of his 3D belt as well. And then also Obi-Wan's belt does wrap around all four sides of the torso, and it looks pretty consistent as well, so I'm pretty proud of that. The rest of the legs and the waistcape here, basically the same exact waistcape as Anakin almost, but like I said, the two robe pieces not extending onto the back section here, but I do have that same dark tan wash running throughout the entire piece. And like I was just talking about with the pouches on Obi-Wan's belt, this reddish brown color for his boots is actually a mixed color, and it does wrap around all four sides of the minifigure's legs. You'll also notice some minimal detail painted onto those boots just like they appear on screen, so I think those turned out looking pretty awesome. And then also I do have a little bit of tan painted onto the left side of the belt here, and that is because these waist capes that Cape Madness makes do tend to create some gaps. And so basically what I mean by that is once I drape the entire waist cape back over the two leg pegs, again that rhymes, you'll notice that there is a little bit of a gap created here, and by painting tan onto the left side of the actual belt piece, I basically fill that in. And that is actually it for Obi-Wan Kenobi, aka Christopher Robin. That movie was so good! Finally, the last minifigure of this showcase, saving the best for last, Ahsoka Tano, my first ever custom Clone Wars Ahsoka, and I cannot believe, like Anakin and Obi-Wan, that I had never really made decent versions of them prior to this, and there's a lot to talk about here. This was not an easy figure to make, and I'm definitely gonna have to break this segment up into sections, so bear with me here, but we'll start off with the head. And obviously I had to fully paint the face myself, my first painted face since Captain America for Infinity War. And obviously one thing I had to take into account, like I always do when painting faces, is the facial expression. And I basically wanted to get somewhere in between her perky smile when she's always bright and chipper, and also her more aggressive side. I didn't want to go too far left or too far right. I wanted to land somewhere in the middle. I think that's what I managed to pull off with painting my first ever Ahsoka face here. And obviously then that and facial expression and her eyes and mouth being surrounded by those markings on her face, those white designs, not an easy thing to paint by any stretch, especially when dealing with white paint, because like I just said, dealing with white paint is never fun. And so, like I always do when I can, especially when painting very precise designs in scenarios like this, I painted everything in gray, all of those face designs around her eyes and mouth, fully painted in gray, and then I went over them with white to keep everything looking as clean as possible. And I think it really worked out here for Ahsoka, and I really could not imagine doing it any other way. And now, the rest of the head, as you can see, her leku. The lower half is actually called the leku. These top points are actually her montrals, which don't actually grow in until, later on in Rebels. And so basically painting every single stripe on this piece was pretty interesting, because that was not the plan at first. I was going to just take Legos. I thought it looked fine, and I was just going to go over their dark blue stripes that they had on it with my own, as you can see, mixed like sand blue color here. And then I realized just how messy the printing actually was on those and how uneven it actually was. And so I realized, okay, gonna have to do it all myself, and then I pretty much painted the entire piece in light gray, like, because again, now I'd be dealing with white paint, but on a much bigger scale here for the rest of this piece, and so I painted the whole thing in gray, and then I painted every single one of those stripes on while correcting myself along the way using the gray paint, which is a lot cleaner than using white paint, so then I had the benefit of being able to make as many mistakes as I needed to along the way of painting all these stripes. And then once I was done painting the stripes, I went around each one of them with white paint, being as precise and as clean as I could throughout the entire process, and it turned out looking a hell of a lot better than I was expecting. I mean, this is something I'm super proud of, and once I was done with all of that, went to the store, got some metallic green thread, cut out a small piece, glued it to the top here as you can see, and then draped it down over the back, gluing it in place, the right side being a little bit longer than the left, because of course the right side is her Padawan braid with a little bit of detail painted down toward the lower half. Now, to get them out of the way, even though they do look really awesome here, Ahsoka's two lightsabers, making these was pretty interesting. I actually started by using that same lightsaber hilt design from Anakin, inspired by my buddy Aaron Legomatic 9's design. Instead, this time though, and I will drop a link to Aaron's YouTube down in the description, this time though, I actually of course had to make them look more like Ahsoka's, and so to do that, I actually sanded the slot where the lightsaber is inserted on the top half here a lot more significantly than I would have otherwise on Anakin's lightsaber hilt, and then I also sculpted the entire bottom piece here on both of these hilts, and so that was probably the two biggest differences when making Ahsoka's lightsaber hilts here. And also you might have noticed that I did glue on these two additional pieces onto the top half of her main defensive blade here, and the main defensive blade is obviously using the standard green blade from Lego, while her offensive Shoto blade here is actually using the older light green lightsaber blade that Lego used to use for the Jedi characters that would have green lightsabers back when Lego Star Wars, I think it was, they stopped using this color back in I think it was 2009, so definitely an older piece here, but really works well when trying to create that delineation between the two colors of green for Ahsoka's lightsaber blades. Obviously I did paint on detail onto both sides of these hilts once I was done, and the blade just came out, so we're just going to go ahead and reinsert that because I was trying to spin it around to give you a better look at that detail I was talking about there, and you can see that there, and then also that detail on both sides of her defensive blade here as well. So I'm really proud of how Ahsoka's lightsabers turned out. And as you can see, the torso being fully painted as well, it's actually the base of it being an area light curved torso, which you might have already noticed, and then I do also have that little 3D element down on her lower abdomen here, and then on the back of the torso you can see I do have some of the bone structure painted onto the exposed skin there, along with the little pouch, and that is also a 3D element that protrudes just a little bit, and it actually protrudes more than that during the actual show, but I decided to keep it a little bit more flat, and so now we'll go ahead and put the head tails back on so that we're not looking at bald Ahsoka here, and you can see now we'll focus on the arms, and the arms were pretty intricate, as you can imagine, just looking at that design that I had to paint onto both of them. It was pretty interesting keeping that as symmetrical as I could, but you might have also noticed that I did include a pair of tiny tactical glove tops connected to her 3D gauntlets, and those are all fully painted in dark red as well, and I think the transition from the wrist to those gauntlets, I mean, the tiny tactical glove tops not being there, the figure looked really awkward without them, and yeah, but painting this design and maintaining all those individual shapes running in between each one of those bars, it was not an easy thing to do, and definitely pretty time consuming. I think it took me a day and a half, 2 days just for the arms alone, so pretty involved, but definitely worth it. And then if we go ahead and just lean the figure up a little bit here to give you a better look at what's going on with the waist cape, you can see the waist cape is something that I really wanted to explain here, because I know some of you who closely follow my work might have expected me to do a 3D belt beginning from this piece here and then wrapping all the way around to the pouch on the back of her torso, but instead I opted to paint it all around the waist cape and also a little bit on the torso in a flat brown color for a number of reasons. And one of those reasons was because the waist cape already adds a lot, and a 3D belt would have been too much. Plus, if I wanted it positioned properly, I would have had to have permanently connected her torso and legs, and like I was just talking about with Anakin and Obi Wan, I usually prefer to have the option to disassemble my minifigures, and regardless of how well I seal the paint on said belt that might have been here, the sides of her arms that face her body, the paint would have probably almost definitely have torn somewhere, because her arms, they constantly rub up against the waist cape and the torso there, so that was something I definitely had to take into account when making that decision. And I can actually probably guarantee that the paint on her tiny tactical glove tops on her wrist there would have definitely torn at some point, because I've actually had that happen before. And there really isn't any detail on the belt, because for one, there isn't any detail on the real belts in the series, but also also because those same problems I just mentioned would definitely have still occurred had I stacked any additional layers of paint onto the belt. But there is a bit more to cover with the waist cape, so I'll go ahead and remove the rest of the minifigure for now to give you a better look at what's going on here. This custom piece glued onto the center of the waist cape is just made of some basic cardstock, but I did have to mix that lavender color to get it right, and then once I painted that in the base color of lavender, I then also had to paint on every single one of those little designs and details running throughout the entirety of that piece, which was pretty fun and a little bit intricate, but I got the job done. I think it looks really awesome. Also, her lightsaber clips for her actual lightsaber hilts are both painted onto this strap here, and then also the same one on the opposite side there. But if we go ahead and unfold the waist cape, you can see the same design as Anakin and Obi Wan's. It's just a basic Cape Madness waist cape, obviously heavily modified and painted, but the legs, you really can't see a lot of what's going on with the legs when that waist cape is on, because obviously I do have the boots painted a little bit high, and then I do also have the diamonds painted onto the sides of both legs, and you can't see these really at all when the waist cape is on. So it definitely helps to see the showcase videos sometimes, because there can be a lot that's left out of the photos that I post elsewhere, especially in a case like this. And then I do also have a set of 3 buckles painted onto each side of her legs, which is not accurate, I found out after painting. So pretty much the buckles are only meant to be on this side and then on this side, but then I also painted them on the insides, which was totally unnecessary and inaccurate. But once I realized I was already painting way too many buckles on, I was just like, you know what, I'm done, and I just left them on, so let's not talk about it. But you might have already noticed there that the detail is painted around all 4 sides of the legs as usual, the belt being left blank just like Anakin and Obi Wan, because of course it does get covered by the waist cape, except for this one little portion. And just like Obi Wan, I did paint a little bar of dark red here to fill in that gap that is created by the waist cape once it's draped over the legs. You can kind of see what I'm talking about here. If you look really closely, you can just barely see that dark red shining through right there where that gap is created. So pretty much the exact same issue with Obi-Wan had to be addressed there, because that tends to happen with those waist capes sometimes. But yeah, oh my god, I think that about does it for Ahsoka Tano, my first time making a really good rendition of the character, or at least I think it turned out really good. And let me know what you think of all 3 of the minifigures down in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. But yeah, otherwise, thanks for making it this far, and let's go ahead and wrap up this video.
This was actually your great trial. Now we see that.
What? Now you see that? You expelled me without hesitation and almost let Tarkin and the Senate execute me. I'm joining the Separatists.
Shut the up. Next time, Master Windu will.
Alright guys, and there you have it, the first of 3, maybe 4 showcases celebrating the 10th anniversary of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Thank you so much for sticking around, and if you'd like to keep up with the progress I'll soon be making on my custom Captain America and Red Skull minifigures from the first Avenger, because of course we're also celebrating the first 10 years of the MCU, or the next Clone Wars showcase featuring the Clone Troopers from AV Figures, then consider checking out my Patreon, where I'll be posting regular updates for all my customizers over there. Otherwise, I'll be posting preview photos whenever possible over on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, so hopefully I'll catch you in one of those places. And yeah, it was awesome to finally make these, and it's been an awesome 10 years. I came to know so many amazing people around the world because of this series. So many memories over Uvu, Skype, and in person. Some of those people are still my friends today, but most of all, it gave me the privilege of sharing my creativity with all of you watching. So thanks for supporting me and the many people I paint. But with that, thanks for watching. I'm sure I'll make new versions of these guys next year when we finally get to see the last season. So that should be awesome. But I'll see you next time. All right. Bye-bye. And as you can see, those triangles are just not even... Those aren't triangles, man. Learn your shapes, Ross.
You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of Master.
What? But I've dedicated my life to the Jedi, and you've all done nothing but lie, look down on me, and undermine my abilities, even after we met the Mortis gods who confirmed I'm the Chosen One, even after you almost let the Senate put my Padawan in front of a firing squad for a crime she didn't commit. And to be honest, I'm the best general here. I've successfully led my men through countless battles in this war, no thanks to any of you. Now for the first time in the 1,000-year history of the Jedi, you're making me the first to be put on the council without the rank of Master? Yeah, that's perfectly fine. I accept your decision. Thanks for your time. I cannot believe, like Anakin, blah, 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 blah. When it comes to me, oh my god. And the straps,
Discovered Dooku ordered a clone army we have. So nothing we must do.
Master, are you sure that's a good idea?
Anakin.
I'm just saying, Fives was going on about some kind of conspiracy.
Skywalker, shut the up.
Pretty great. As you can see, this is a lot to talk about.
This was actually your great trial. Now we see that. And should you rejoin the Order, you will become the youngest Jedi to be granted the rank of Master.
What?
You're not serious.